Talk for this evening is why Bible morality makes sense for youth. Brother Brown, all of the young people really want to know why the Bible morality makes sense. Not too many years ago, it would not have been necessary to say Bible morality. Just the word morality would have been enough. Because most persons in the world observe certain standards for ages that basically and were primarily based on the Bible. So when you would say morality, then people knew what you had in mind. They had in very high standards that for the most part were based on the Bible, God's Word. But now something took place within the lifetime of most present here this evening, and that was back in the 60s. There took place what present-day historians have called a sexual revolution. Now, the name itself describes what they saw the 1960s as beginning, and it has continued to go in the direction that began then to what we have today. Now, what they meant by the sexual revolution is that suddenly they came to that period of time in the 1960s where sexual mores changed. No longer did people in general want to have the same moral standards that have been observed for centuries and ages in the past, but they moved ahead, as they would put it, into what they called a new sexual freedom. Now, significantly, that took place, as stated, in the 1960s, which means as a young person, a youth in Jehovah's organization today, if you are around 24 or under, then it means all during your lifetime you have lived when this so-called sexual freedom came into existence, where you have seen a change in sexual mores and where people have had in general a different attitude towards sexual morality. And that's why when we introduce the topic, why Bible morality makes sense for today's youth, we have to qualify morality by putting the Bible in. The world follows now what they call situational ethics, where what is right or wrong is determined by the circumstances. Their feeling is that if it's not hurting you, it's not hurting someone else, then there are no rules. It's all right. A person should be free to do that. Other standards that people held very, very high, in great esteem for centuries, have suddenly been abandoned. For example, it was always held to be something quite honorable for a young person to maintain virginity prior to marriage, and then fidelity after marriage. But the situation's changed now. If a young Christian sister is a virgin, a girl not having had intercourse, she now is looked askance at by the worldly persons around her, because now they boast of their sexual experiences.
You read one survey in Awake that said they asked 1,079 young persons between the ages of 18 and 24 how many sexual experiences had they had already in life. And then they added it up to get the average. And the average one between that age category, 18 and 24, had already had 7 separate sexual experiences. That was the average. And so now young people that go to school, they take pride in having given up their virginity. In fact, girls who are virgins often feel embarrassed, and statistics have shown that they will lie about their virginity to give others, their contemporaries, the impression that they've already had a sexual experience. And then even after marriage, among young persons in particular, because they do marry quite young, many, today at least, do not view fidelity in marriage the same way as it used to be. See, it used to be that after one married, then that was their companion and partner for life and their only sexual interest. One recent survey I read said that up to 50% of married men and up to 40% of married women have proved unfaithful to their mate, that is, by committing adultery. But now, when you think about it, really, adultery is an old word. Do you hear it today at all? When you read in publications of the world, it's a word that's just been thrown out altogether. You hear it when you come to the Kingdom Hall and read the Bible, but not in this sexual freedom that people feel they have now. When do you hear people at your job or at school talk about adultery? It's a word that's just about faded out of existence. In fact, when they refer to infidelity in the marriage, they talk about an extramarital affair. They like that. It sort of makes it seem legitimate. An extramarital affair. So quite clearly we can see that since that period of time of the 1960s, sexual mores have changed. And that means as a young person today, as a young Christian today, you've never lived when Bible morality was the standard. You've never lived during a period of time where most people look to and adhere to the high and lofty standards in God's Word, the Bible. You were born and are growing up in a sexually promiscuous society. But now, in spite of the fact that the world in general has abandoned the high standards of Bible morality, the fact that they have become promiscuous, abandoning sexual immorality, has not changed one bit God's standard. God's standard, Bible morality, is the same as it has always been, unchanged. Now, I'd like you to turn to Colossians chapter 3, and let's just read from this one place of numerous, so many places, right in the Bible, where the Bible morality is defined, and where it's spelled out very clear so that all can have it in mind and understand just what is meant. Colossians chapter 3. Now, verse number 5. Now, follow that closely. It's sort of a sum up of what is meant. It says, "Deaden therefore your body members that are upon the earth as respects fornication, uncleanness, sexual appetite, hurtful desire, and covetousness, which is idolatry. Now, that's significant. I wonder if you young folks notice that. Look again. It says, deaden your body members as respects. And then it names fornication, uncleanness, sexual appetite. Now, by deaden there, it's very clear that these body members are trying to stay alive. See, you can't put anything to death that has not lived, that isn't alive and active. So when the apostle says to deaden your body members, he's talking about something that's alive, and that if you do not put it to death, that is, putting it to death in the sense that you destroy the strength of it, as the key. That you take these body members that cry out and crave the satisfactions of the world around you, that you put them to death. You destroy the strength of them. Now, unless a young person does that, and we're speaking to you as a youth, and we're speaking about something that makes sense, unless you do that, unless you take what is alive in you and put it to death, as respects fornication, sexual appetite, uncleanness, then you're going to find yourself being swept along in the sexual freedom, the sexual revolution that exists now, and it would be just a matter of time before you would be totally out of God's favor. Many have done it. Regrettably, many who are or who were a part of God's organization. If you think about it right now, you've known some in your own congregation who did not follow this. They had bodily members that were alive, crying out, craving the satisfactions of the world from fornication, adultery, uncleanness, sexual appetite, because they did not put to death, knock the strength out of those bodily members. They're no longer there. They've been disfellowshipped, or they walked away, or committees are looking for them now to catch up with them, see what they're doing wrong, and if unrepentant, have to put them out of the congregation. That makes sense. That's Bible morality, and directed particularly and specifically for the youth among God's people today. Now, young persons, I'd like to ask you this question to think about. Why is it so difficult for a young person today to follow Bible morality and to remain chaste, not committing fornication, not getting involved in any uncleanness, not developing a sexual appetite? Why is it so difficult? Have you thought about it? Because very often, if you can understand why it is so difficult, if you can understand what you are up against in striving to live up to this Bible morality, you will be aided to do so. Well, now, likely many reasons could be given, but I want to bring up two and take the time to discuss these two reasons a bit. Reasons that we have found makes it so difficult to remain chaste, pure, living up to God's standard. Now, I'll mention what they both are, and then we can discuss the two somewhat in detail. The first is peer pressure. Peer, P-E-E-R, peer pressure. In fact, they both are kinds of pressures. And the second is the pressure in your own body as a youth or as one in your early teens, your mid-teens, your late teens, on over into your 20s, as a young adult, even single or married when you get to that period. Now, those are the two things we want to give some consideration to: peer pressure and then the pressure in your own body. Peer pressure. Can someone tell me what that is, a young person, when I say one thing that makes it difficult for you to live up to the standard of God's Word, the Bible, is peer pressure? Just a sentence. What do I mean by peer pressure? All right, here's a hand right here. Now, kind of loud, Lisa, but not too long. Go right ahead. All right, I hope you heard her. It was a very good thought. She really zeroed right in on, she said, when a person your own age or one of your contemporaries brings against you pressure by their group activity to get you to do what they are doing. Now, it has been found that young persons will do almost anything to be accepted by their peers at school. That they're willing to be dishonest, they're willing to lie, they're willing to fabricate things, they're willing to do almost anything just to be accepted by those at school or friends that they have. For example, now, here were some young persons interviewed, and it's a very fine little interview in a magazine. And they brought up this subject, peer pressure, and young people could candidly tell how they were affected by this. Now, here's what Eileen said. Eileen is 13. Eileen, 13, said, "I do whatever my friends want me to do just so they won't say something or think that I'm not brave. We had a bazaar at school, and there were 3 girls there who wear clothes that have to be just so. In other words, they were fancy. She said, I was wearing old boys' jeans and didn't look too good. So I went back home and changed into my other pants so that the girls wouldn't laugh. Sometimes my friends just bother me. Then they have an attitude, and I feel that everybody is picking on me." Well, that was peer pressure. Eileen went to the bazaar, and she saw her friends dressed just so. So, as she said, she went back home and changed. Others do a lot more, though. Now, here's what Thelma's 16. Thelma said, "I once had a friend, and I guess the only thing that the two of us had in common is that both of us were very depressed. After I was no longer depressed, I thought I would lose this person as a friend if I didn't call him up and sound very depressed. So even when I wasn't, I found myself lying about how lethargic and depressed and lackadaisical I was feeling. It was awful because I couldn't say what I really meant." Then she says that's a form of depression. So just to keep her friend, she goes on to tell how she kept saying how bad she felt, how depressed she was, since the friend was always depressed. Then another one tells us about this extreme situation. She said, "I would try desperately to chop off a piece of myself so I'd fit the mold." That is how the other youngsters were. In the 6th grade, now notice how young this started. In the 6th grade, they showed a film about menstruation. After that, everybody talked about it all the time. I wasn't menstruating, but my friends had their menstruation. Every time I got a little bit sick, I hoped it had arrived. I wanted it so badly that I called up my girlfriend and told her I was menstruating when I wasn't. And I was buying sanitary napkins and not using them, which was ridiculous. But peer pressure made her feel that she had to be like her friends. She had to please them because they would bring a lot of pressure on all around them to conform. Now, that's basically why it's so difficult for Christians who must mix with the world, at least to the extent they go to school with persons in the world, live in the neighborhood with persons in the world, that they want to be just like them. So it's very difficult for a Christian to take note of many of their peers around them who are sexually active and doing things out of harmony with God's Word, for them to stand up and say they're different. Because when they do, they're going to be labeled. If they say, I'm a virgin, or I believe in virginity, I do not believe in premarital sex, then they're going to be labeled, well, she is a refuser, to use their own expression. Or she is a deviant. She's contrary to the norm. Then if she explains, well, I do it because of God's law. I do it because I want to please Jehovah. I do this standard of morality for Bible reasons, for religious reasons. And they may say, well, she's trying to disguise some psychological inhibition. She's afraid, so she uses religion to try to cover it up. Or they say he or she is old-fashioned, following puritanical standards. So you see, they can build up all of this pressure, and the whole tactic is to try to soften you up, just to get you to sink to the low sink of debauchery that they have, to join what they call the sexual revolution, and to become promiscuous. You see, all of the talk, all of the labeling, all of the little titles and names they give to those who follow Bible morality is merely just a part of trying to condition you, to bring you down, to make you follow their standards. And all of them will act in unison to bring this type of pressure against young Christian people. Well, how should you really feel now about peer pressure? Should a Christian really be more concerned about pleasing people who will soon lose life entirely when the system of things comes to an end? Or should they not be more concerned about pleasing Jehovah God, getting a proper relationship with Him? Good counsel is found in Proverbs 13, and it's good to have this in mind when there is a little fear, maybe as respects what peer pressure might be building up to get you to act like others do at school, in the community, or even certain elements in the congregation. Proverbs 13 and verse 20, it says, he that is walking with wise persons will become wise, but he that is having dealings with the stupid ones will fare badly. Now, the stupid ones are the peers who bring all of the pressure against Christian boys and girls, Christian youth, to be immoral. And anyone having dealings with them dealings with them trying to please them, trying to live up to what they want, trying to lie or pretend there's something that they're not, it said they're going to fare badly, very, very badly, because by such actions they are unable to please God. So if as a young person it is your determination to follow Bible morality because it makes sense, then it means you will have to learn to cope with this problem. Choose wise persons. Now, it may be that there are no wise persons in your community or at school. And it may be that there are not too many in some congregations. Some congregations have a certain peer pressure among youth that build up at times to try to get them to go contrary to what's in God's Word, the Bible. But even if it comes down to just a few companions, just a few associates, pick out those who are wise, those who fear God and not the people around them, and those who are not afraid to stand up for Bible morality and not give in to the promiscuous society that surrounds them. Now ask yourself, as a young person, are you fearful of your peers? Does peer pressure make you do things that you ought not do, things that are contrary to God's Word? Are you courageous? Are you bold? Are you willing to stand up and be counted? Do you not mind being labeled as a refuser, as a deviant, or whatever they call persons today who do not conform to what they desire? So a young person who wishes to follow then Bible morality must have in mind that clear standard from God's Word. Peer pressure, don't walk with your peers who are stupid ones, or you fare badly even as they would are around you. But the other one really has to do with the pressure from your own body. Now, let's just talk about your body as a young one. That's where the difficulty comes to do the right thing. Now, to help us get a scriptural setting in this, 1 Corinthians chapter 7 would be the text to look at, because what is stated there gives us great insight into how we must then cope with the pressure within our own body. 1 Corinthians chapter 7. Now it's verse 37, and the point we're interested in really is in the first part of that verse, and we'll strive to get the sense of it. Now it says, 1 Corinthians chapter 7, now we're at verse 36. Note that, 36. He says, but if anyone thinks he is behaving improperly toward his virginity, if that one is past the bloom of youth, and this is the way it should take place, let them do what they want. He does not sin. Let them marry. Now, notice it said first, and we can be very thankful we have the New World Translation here where we can get the sense of it. It said, if anyone thinks he is behaving improperly toward his virginity. It is of interest when you look in most of the other translations of the Bible, they really obscure the meaning of that text, and thus it couldn't be as helpful to young persons. For example, most of them say something very similar to what the King James Version says, where it states there, he behaveth himself uncomely toward his virgin. And the thought expressed there by behaving improperly toward his virgin most have felt is talking about something to do with incest. And that it's talking about maybe a father, an uncle, an older relative who has some younger daughter around who is a virgin, and he starts behaving improperly toward her. And you'll find most translations give that slant, and when you look at what most commentators say on that verse, they miss the whole point, and so there is no power or meaning in it for young people. But we're thankful for the New World Translation that helps us to get the sense where it says, if he is behaving improperly toward his or her virginity. In other words, not toward another person who is a virgin, thus indicating something in the way of incest, but one who is behaving improperly toward his or her own virginity or moral chasteness. So it's applicable to young people. Then it says, thereafter, if that is past the bloom of youth. Now, that expression, bloom of youth. See, the two are related. His virginity is connected with the bloom of youth. Now, the bloom of youth there, if you were looking at the original language Greek, you would see huperakmos. That's the Greek word you see in there, which really comes from two Greek words put together. Huper, which means beyond, and the other is acme, which you know means the highest. Acme, the highest point, the highest level. So it's showing here that there is a certain period that you come to in life that affects you, that involves your body, where you get into the bloom of youth. And when Paul says past the bloom of youth, he means you have come to this particular point, and it's developed higher and higher and higher till it's reached its very highest point, its peak, and then it starts to lessen. Well, now, that's connected with virginity. A word used more commonly in the world is that period we call puberty. And that has to do with this bloom of youth, where a young person gets into that period in life where he or she first begins to note the genitals maturing, and they first start having come alive and very strongly in their bodies what it feels like to be aroused sexually and to feel passion. All of that has to do with this bloom of youth, and it starts out, this period, when one, well, for girls it's usually around 12 or so, and boys it's usually around 14 or so, when there starts to bloom here, and it continues to build up and get higher and higher until when one gets over out of those teens or late teens or early 20s, then he passes that period of the bloom of youth, and that period where the sexual urge, the sexual desire, passion, being aroused sexually, takes place. A contrasting point, if you just look there in verse 9, still in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, you'll notice an expression there that stands in contrast to this, where it says, but if they do not have self-control, let them marry, for it is better to marry than to be inflamed with passion. Well, you see, that is what begins during this period of puberty, and then it gets higher and higher, then one will pass that period. Well, there starts to take place this build-up of passion, and that period of the bloom of youth, a Christian following Bible morality, is to maintain his or her virginity, or that is, not having sexual intercourse. Now, that's why it then becomes so difficult, because it is that period in life where there is developing to a higher and higher degree the desire for sexual satisfaction, and yet Bible morality, God's standard, says this would be inappropriate, it's wrong. And remember what we read earlier? It said deaden the body members, those crying out for this satisfaction, those longing and craving for this. Now, here is the problem you have, particularly now as a Christian youth. What we described to that point is true of all persons, whether they are in the world or in the truth. When they go through this period, they develop and finally bloom, and then past that, and that's where passion builds up, or as we read there in verse 9, inflamed with passion. Well, now, what happens? A Christian who studies God's Word, the Bible, comes to meetings, and develops the self-control needed, and prayer to God, and a proper relationship with Him, he has that period where he's going through, but you could liken it to the smoldering coals on a fire. I think most have fixed barbecue, and you have your charcoal there. Now, you know, when it first starts, you kind of have a difficult time getting it going, but it seems like when it catches on, then pretty soon those coals are kind of red hot. Well, now, that's sort of the way it is with a Christian. As a Christian is in this world and developing the self-control during this period of the bloom of youth or puberty, the passion heats up, but it's like those smoldering coals. They're just staying there. Well, now, what the world does, and what your peers will do, is they'll try to, by the way they conduct themselves and do things, they'll try to fan those coals like that, where they're hot. They fan them like that. Now, what happens when those hot coals are fanned? If you fix barbecue, you know, or if you've seen that. What happens when they are fanned? All right, let's take a young person. All right, yes, young brother. What happens? Okay, that was the way, better than I could say. He said they will blaze up. In other words, get on fire. Or as we read there in verse 9, the passion then becomes inflamed. And you see, the way the world is designed, it gears everything to try to fan and get that passion inflamed and really heat it up, so that a Christian youth will do just like everyone else and give in to fornication and displease God. Now, that happens in many ways. And the only way a Christian can combat this is by continual reading of God's Word, studying it, drawing closer to God, developing the self-control. Then he's sort of keeping himself during that period as cool as possible. But if he even unwittingly will do the wrong things, or be in the wrong environment, or associate with the wrong person, or expose himself to the wrong things, then he is more or less putting himself in front of the fan, and those hot coals will, as our young brother said, they'll blaze up, they'll get hot, and then when that passion is burning that way, it's out of control, and then it's just a little time before that young person is going to feel, well, I must commit immorality and abandon the Bible standard, because it blazes up so much, it becomes so fiery and unflamed, and that passion becomes so inflamed, then that young person starts to feel, I can't stand it, I can't take it, it's better to ignore God's law, disobey God, and satisfy that urge. And many do that. But those who continue to read and study God's Word can keep it under control. Now, there are many ways the world will seek to do it. Some of them are quite obvious. Others are not. For example, a young girl or teenage girl could get a certain record from her collection or take out a certain album and put it on and start playing it. And it would be just like turning the electric fan over those hot charcoals and watch it start to blaze up. Now, what type of music do you think would start inflaming that passion in her? What would be an example of the types of music you think might have this effect on her if she listens to it and concentrates on what is being said? What kind of music then? I would like a young person, but Brother McLeod, you'll do. All right, yes, romantic music. This is why, if you know this, girls are very much attracted to romantic music. To sing about love, to sing about someone holding them, someone embracing them, someone taking them away. And so they start listening to that over and over again. Now, they may think it's quite an innocent thing to do, but yet it's only building up the pressure in their own body. So a young Christian then would have to watch that he or she was not deliberately doing things that would inflame that passion and make it more difficult to hold to Bible morality. Now, it's all around in the world. Satan will do it in many different ways. Even when you're watching certain programs on television. Now, I could bring up some of the shows, but I'm sure you're not watching any of those kind that would deal with romantic things. I'm sure you young people are doing just like you see our sister in the magazine on singleness. How many have read that yet? Put your hand up if you're young and you've read it. I'm looking too. I see you looking around. I'm looking too. All right, let me ask a specific question and maybe you will remember it there. A love story comes on the TV and you see a long, passionate kiss. But then you see our single sister doing what? All right, now some got it already. What do you see her doing as that program comes on? All right, just about straight down this aisle. Thank you, sister. Yes, now she's not a teenager. She's single. She's not a teenager. But she's remained single all during life. And she recognizes that even though she's way past the bloom of youth, that it would not be wise for her to watch that type of thing as an unmarried person, because it's only going to make it more difficult for her. But even when you watch decent shows, decent in quotes, I should say, quote decent, Satan is still at work because you have to watch the commercials. And many of the commercials, did you know, are designed to arouse person sexual? All the commercials are made up in New York, their 7th Avenue, where they carry out the marketing for all the products. And they have what they call turn-on commercials. And that is, if an advertiser wants a sexually oriented commercial, one to advertise his product in such a way as to arouse people in a sexual way so that they will feel some stimulation and think about buying that product later, then they formulate for them what they call a turn-on commercial. And they're regularly reviewed on the TV screen. Now, I have a list of them here, but I watched them in New York, and I don't even know if they show all of these down here in Chattanooga there. But now, having given you the principle of it, maybe you could think of some of what they call turn-on commercials, where the whole commercial takes a slant to have a little sexual aroused. I could give mine, but you may not see these here, but you probably could think of better ones. Yes, this young brother. Or Tab. Okay, I have seen that. What is she in, walking in? Yes, the brother brings up a good point, because you wonder what drinking Tab has to do with all of the beach beauty you see around there. Yes, that's a very good example. Did anyone have another one? Turn-on commercials. That's the name they give it. This young brother, please. All right, yes. I've seen those where she gets across the hood of the car in this very thin negligee that's blowing everywhere, and close-up shots of her. Yes, and then you wonder, now, does that come with the automobile, or what really is this about? Yes, that's a turn-on commercial. All right, that's a good one. Yes, right here then, Sister McLeod. Okay, and what are you mostly looking at? That may be a little direct, because I have seen that. I think you've seen that where the emphasis is. See, and that's to make you think, well, now, I want to walk down the street and have that little look, too, when I go down the street there. So, you see, the world designs things this way. It's not by accident. I don't know if you have the jean commercials. How many look at the jean commercials here? Maybe you don't have them. All right, I think you do have them. Yes, and they will take these, the camera will come on. You may have been enjoying a very fine show, and then suddenly they zoom in on some denim-clad legs, and there it is. It starts various movements that are suggestive, and that's to make you think, when you get ready to buy a pair of denims, a pair of jeans, that you should buy that particular kind. Even you're trying to think, what does traveler's checks have to do the turn-on commercial? But this is in Japan. You have that one over in Japan. How many have seen that one? Okay, I think you have. You see, first of all, an American couple going native in the public bath in Japan. I think you know what I mean by going native. And then suddenly a real native, Japanese fellow, starts easing over their way, and he somehow starts to stand up. And then she said, no, you can just stay in the water halfway. And then after that, it comes on by our traveler's check, which is to make you to think, well, when I get ready to travel, see, I saw this particular commercial. It's to have the stimulant on you so that you will think in terms of that and buy that particular traveler's check. Then in some of the magazines, too, the sister already mentioned the certain underwear commercials. I think you've seen them out on the range, cowboy hat, and he has on just maybe a pair of undershorts, full-figured man, and he has on just his underwear, undershorts. And they call these beefcake turn-on commercials, which just the opposite. You know the old cheesecake where they used to, as you brought out, they exposed the women. But now people have become so susceptible to this that they are trying to bring in more and more beefcake. And this is why even if you see cologne advertisement or soap, you're always going to see flesh, and they're in the shower or coming in or out. And this is to get people in a position where these particular turn-on commercials catch their attention and makes them think of it to buy it. So this is very detrimental, particularly for those young persons, for those in their youth, because it is not just a matter of the programs that one has to watch, but it's a subtlety that day by day, you see, it's put into the mind, so it makes it very difficult within one's own youthful body to gain control over it. But yet, this is why that youthful period then is so difficult to remain chaste. It is why then it is so difficult to hold to Bible morality, because besides going through that difficult period, the bloom of youth, at the same time, you must go through and deal with the problems that are characteristic of that time. Now, thanks to Jehovah, most of our young people hold up quite well. But sadly, some yield to and give in to these desires of youth and do commit immorality and have to be disciplined by the congregation. Then there may be others sort of in between who are thinking about it. And they're sort of thinking about it and wondering, well, am I really depriving myself of something or not? Now, the Bible shows that the effects are extremely harmful. In Proverbs, the 5th chapter, we have an example of what immorality is like after it has taken place. Proverbs chapter 5. Now, notice there, verse number 3 and 4. We'll read those two. It says, "For as a honeycomb, the lips of a strange woman keep dripping, and her palate is smoother than oil." See, that much sounds perhaps good. But it goes on to say, "But the after effect from her is as bitter as wormwood, and it is as sharp as a two-edged sword." So now, you see, it describes both sides. The devil presents things, and one's own body may cry out saying, well, this is good. It's just like honey that is dripping. It's inviting. It's tasteful. But now, the Bible gives us great insight in that it shows the after effect. After it's taken place, after one has abandoned Bible morality and committed fornication, it says one isn't satisfied. It's as bitter as wormwood. That's a woody type plant, known for its extreme bitterness, no matter what variety it is. And it shows that after one has gone contrary to what God has said, then the bad effect takes place. That it's as sharp as a two-edged sword. In other words, after one has done the wrong, then it starts cutting, ripping him in parts in two ways. One, he feels now, the Christian, that he's, of course, violated what God said, so he feels self-condemned, guilty conscience, hates himself or herself. How could I have done it? And then, of course, at the same time, he feels God's anger, divine anger. So like a two-edged sword, he feels ripped and torn apart and condemning himself. And then at the same time, he knows that God's anger is against him and could even lead to him, to his destruction. And so that double blow comes against him because of having violated what God said. I wanted to read you something. Wait a minute. I just thought it was of interest that after the society had published the fine series, Now You're Reading in Awake, what young people ask, you get at the 8th issue each month, and then publishing other information last fall that many young persons took the time to write to society and express their feelings on the matter. Here was one young sister showing the truthfulness of what we just read there. She makes the point in her letter to the society. She says, "I can personally identify with what has been published. Even though I know Jehovah has forgiven me, the guilty conscience remains. and the spot is still there. She says, I never knew that disobedience to Jehovah meant so many if only heartache and sleepless nights. There are times, she goes on, when I look into the mirror and wish I were dead. I thought that by committing fornication, I would solve my problem. I was sadly mistaken. But happily, I woke up immediately, but it was too late. I wish I could have awakened sooner. Encouragingly, though, I didn't have to be disfellowshipped. I was publicly reproved, although I'm still ashamed every time I enter the Kingdom Hall. She's testifying by her own experience that she thought it was going to solve her problem to be immoral, but now she's tasted that wormwood, that bitter flavor, and the two-edged sword. She's condemning herself, and she feels God's anger, even though she knows he has forgiven him. Another sister writes, expressing herself very nicely, and she had problems. She says, and you'll notice the similarity. She said, I tried solving my illness through immorality, only to find that it aggravated my problem. She's talking about that problem of that boomer youth. She likens it to an illness. She goes on, immorality masks the real problem for a while until reality surfaces, and then you feel devastated. I tried to substitute sexual intimacy as a comfort rather than trying to build a solid relationship with my Creator. Then she goes on, although this is the happiest I've been in quite some time, the scars still remain. What has been published by the society has been very helpful, but I have reaped what I sowed in so many ways. I have found myself almost unable to love or form trusting relationships with anyone for fear of rejection. But then there is the guilt I feel when people that don't know me well assume that I am a virgin and commend me, knowing that I've been raised in the truth. So now I feel as if I'm living a lie. I often pray I will find a mate who loves Jehovah one day and loves Jehovah's standards and who can overlook my past mistakes. Yet I live in fear that if I ever meet a decent brother, he will reject me because I haven't kept myself clean. I worry that he won't trust me. I worry I won't trust myself. I worry I never will be emotionally stable enough for marriage. My parents worry, and then I start worrying again. Nothing but worry, 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 the price paid for immorality. And then she goes on to express her appreciation to Jehovah's organization for the help that had been given her. Now, the reason this is beneficial, and as so many young people have indicated in writing and sharing their feelings with the society, is that it may spare some. Because we know that right now, there are some listening who may be thinking, well, I'm really missing something if I don't get involved in immorality or some uncleanness. But be assured, just as the scriptures pointed out, it may look enticing, it may appear to be sweet, dripping honey. One's body might be crying out for satisfaction, but after effect, it will be just like these sisters described. It'll be as bitter as wormwood. It'll be like a two-edged sword that touches, because it will destroy the most important thing that you had built up, and that is a proper relationship with Jehovah God. So then, very clearly then, it's advisable for youth in Jehovah's organization today to understand your body, to learn it, and to anticipate problems before they come up. Recognize what is it in the world that starts to inflame the passion in you, and then withdraw. Is it a book? Is it a magazine? Then don't read it. Is it certain programs on TV? Does it have to do with certain movies? Is it the prospect of fantasizing about certain dates? Does it have to do with dancing, close dancing in particular? Then whatever it is, anticipate it and strive to keep yourself away from these dangers, while at the same time doing just as these sisters recognized but too late, that what they needed was a proper relationship with Jehovah God, and building that, drawing close to him, developing those fruits of the Spirit by study of God's Word and activity in the congregation, then one will be able to maintain the standard that God gives. Yes, there are rewards in adhering to the Bible standards, and though the world has generally taken another standard, though they are enjoying what they feel now to be a sexual freedom, it all is going to end up in their lasting and final destruction. Whereas those who are young among Jehovah's people today, who understand the problem and what is happening, and who will live by the standards in God's Word, the Bible, will find that they will enjoy the blessings in a decent, clean way of life now, a good conscience, never having to have those adverse effects from doing what is wrong and displeasing God, and such clean, responsive, youthful ones, as is true of the majority of Jehovah's people today, will be able to enjoy the blessings of a clean system, a moral system that will be based on Bible morality, God's morality, because it does make sense.